Good evening, everybody. I am Casey Venning, co-founder and executive director of Helping Empower Youth. Also the founder and chief strategist for ANSA Strategies. And on tonight, we are so excited to bring this conversation to you. If you've been following Hey in particular for any length of time, then you know that in 2021, we hosted this conversation really as we were getting into the meat of the work that myself and Hayes co-founder Coach Boyd was doing as it related to young men who were selling water on busy intersections across the city. And lots of stuff has happened as we are been doing this work, and the conversation has extended by virtue of the work that we've been doing. We have had conversations with folks in Cincinnati and in Houston, in Nashville and Detroit and Baltimore and DC. And so folks have been looking at the work that we do, using it as a case study. And what we realize is that while we can continue to have conversations that are unique to just us, like most things here in Atlanta, we kind of lead the charge in. And so we wanted to make sure that we broaden this conversation in light of a couple of instances that have happened over the last couple of weeks in two states in particular, Florida and Texas. And we're going to get into that if you are not aware of what that is and what we are referencing. But if this is your first time tuning in, again, thank you for being here. Helping Empower Youth is an organization where we work really hard to ensure that young people have the skills and the tools that they need to be inspired and motivated and mobilized to change their world. And we do that through STEM and through entrepreneurship. And I'm really excited because also hosting tonight's show is ANSA Strategies, which is a consulting firm that I started because I realized that sometimes we have to change the narrative through conversation, through training and facilitation. And this work is really designed to cultivate and elevate equitable narratives as it relates to Black youth and community in particular. If you have not already subscribed to our YouTube page for Hey, we invite you to do so. Hopefully, some of you all are tuning in over there as well, as we got a lot of different platforms going. But you can go to Hey in Action and the number one to subscribe so that you can keep up on all things happening around Hey. And then I would love it if you would also subscribe to ANSA's YouTube page as well. At these new accounts have the @ sign after the / we are the answer, because we have everything that we need, right? So with that, I am going to bring our panelists up so that we can get some introductions from each of them. And we want to encourage you all that as you have comments and questions, that you feel free to share those with us. We will be able to see them, and we want to get you all in on the conversation as much as we possibly can as well. So I'm not sure what order everybody else sees. It should be the order that is on the screen here. And while I would go immediately to my right, your left, Cynthia, I'd be remiss if I don't kick it to our co-founder first, Coach Boyd. So if you could give us 30 seconds of a quick introduction so people know who you are.
How's that? That better?
Yes.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Coach Boyd, and as she said, I'm the co-founder and director of programming here at Helping Empower Youth.
Awesome. Thank you. Miss Cynthia?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Cynthia Madison. I've been in education for 12 years. I coach track and field, and I assist in a number of community projects in and around the Southwest Atlanta area.
Happy to have you. Sterling?
Hey, good evening, everybody. Sterling Johnson with the Partnership for Selling Equity, where I lead our Just Opportunity portfolio that's focused on economic inclusion and all of our economic mobility strategies. So it's a pleasure to be with everyone tonight.
Good to have you. We've seen each other a lot today. But all good stuff, all good stuff. Latoya?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Latoya Black. I am from Indianapolis. I am an educational consultant, racial equity developer, and melanated leader. I work across the nation, but mostly in the Indianapolis region, and I've been in education for 15 years now.
Good to have you. Aretta?
Hello, my name is Aretta Baldwin, and I am the District 2 representative on the Atlanta Board of Education, as well as the vice chair. I'm also a small business owner, and I've been in education, it feels like all my life, as I am the mother of a 21-year-old who will be soon graduating from the University of Kentucky.
Oh, wow. Congratulations. No small feat, even for the mama. Good stuff. Well, we're going to get ready to show a video, but I do want to just do a quick icebreaker in one word. We've been talking about this since last week. I need one word for everybody's reaction to the Alabama Riverboat Brawl. Just one word reaction. Cynthia, we're going with you.
Who's first?
You.
I'm sorry. I have to bring a little humor to the situation. My word is chair.
Okay. Good stuff. Sterling.
Look, now chairs have had the career week. I've never seen folding chairs be more popular in my life, right?
Exactly.
But to that point, I think I will say sensational. I loved the fact that people jumped in to support a stranger who they saw in danger. So,
Love it. Coach Boyd.
I guess my one word would be tired. You know, I think them folks tired. They look tired and ready, and the right situation presented itself in order for them to be able to show.
Yep, pretty much. Aretta?
I'm going to say community, kind of along Sterling in terms of it was honestly prideful to see the community come together and to stand up, and almost like Coach Boyd said, like tired, just had enough. I know we're gonna get into it, but just in light of everything that had just happened and the boat being named Harriet, it was time.
Understood. LaToya?
I think the word for me is unity for all the reasons that have already been listed. It was just wonderful to see us coming together in support of us. I don't condone violence. I don't think any of us do, but like Coach Boyd said, enough is enough. Folks can only take so much. It was just wonderful to see that take place.
Yeah. My word would be overdue. I think for a lot of the reasons we shared. So overdue. And I think a lot of what we all shared is going to come back up as we get into this conversation. But for those of you who may be tuning in and you have no clue what the premise of this conversation is, I want to just set some tone and some context for you. We learned maybe about a month ago now that Florida passed a bill that said that sixth grade social studies in particular had to teach that slavery was a benefit, was a benefit for those of African descent. And I was befuddled and confused and all the things. And it didn't sit well with me. But I didn't have a chance to really like mull it over, because then I got news that Houston was going to turn 28 of their school libraries or media centers into detention centers, basically. Well, they've renamed it teen centers, but you only go there if you have a discipline problem. And so they removed librarians and books and media centers out of schools that probably need them the most, to basically have in-house disciplinary systems. And so I just thought that those would be two kind of anchor stories for us to be able to have this conversation. So as I bring this video up, I want us to take a look at it so that we can use it as the basis of our conversation.
Must now teach students about the, quote, benefit of slavery when teaching Black history. The controversial new education standard passed by the State Board of Education earlier this week Now, this follows Governor DeSantis' so-called Stop Woke Act, which forced the rewriting of education standards there in Florida. A controversial part of these new standards is instruction for middle school students to learn, quote, how slaves develop skills, which in some instances could be applied for their personal benefit. The largest teachers union in the state has spoken out against the new standards, calling them, quote, a step backward, adding that students deserve the full truth of American history. For more on this, we are joined by Andrew Atterbury. He is an education policy reporter for Politico based in Florida. Andrew, implying that enslaved people benefited from their bondage has understandably upset many people. How are folks in Florida responding to this?
Sure. Hey, thanks for having me. Glad to be here from Tallahassee. So that they came out on Wednesday at this meeting, and this is really the first time that people got a glimpse of what these standards look like. And it was a firestorm for the Florida Department of Education, the Board of Education. People that were there weren't too thrilled with these lessons, but the state, they were proud to roll these out. This is something they've been working on for a while. Like you said, they come from the Stop Woke Act. That was something that specifically Governor Ron DeSantis requested last year. The woke part is actually an acronym. It means the Wrongs to Our Kids and Employees Act. That was something that was one of his biggest parts of his agenda back last year. And that what the law actually does, it creates new protections for students and even workers is a whole other part of it, that a person shouldn't be instructed to feel guilt, anguish, or any form of psychological distress due to their race, color, sex, or national origin. So because of that new law, they decided that they needed to change all of these the standards too. So they actually created a whole new carve out on Black history, which is why they were so proud of it. It was something that they thought went even deeper than their previous lessons. But whenever these were rolled out and you saw some of the framing of it, some people really took issue with it.
Andrew, I should say that we reached out to the governor's office and they pointed us to a statement that was shared by the Board of Education. It reads in part, quote, Florida students deserve to learn how slaves took advantage of whatever circumstances they were in to benefit themselves and the community of African descendants. How does this differ from what has been taught in the state in the past?
Well, when you look at the lessons, they really didn't have any specific carve-outs for Black history. So this is all, for a lot of the stuff is new things that they're introducing, which is why the state thinks this is good for them. We're going, hey, we're actually going deeper into some of this stuff. But when you look at, like you said, the way that some of these were worded, like the benefits of it, people said that was just absolutely not okay. I mean, you saw this getting issue. Like people were raising, like civil rights lawyer Benjamin Crump was talking about this. So this was getting a lot more attention than just Florida, which is probably not something that people expected, just from the way that it was rolled out. And as you and the statement that you mentioned earlier, the state is also taking aim at the teachers union, saying that a lot of this is their fault and that they're blowing up an issue that the state thinks really isn't a big deal. And this is something that you see a lot in Florida. DeSantis administration, the Department of Education, they're constantly at odds with the teachers union. This is things that go back to the COVID pandemic, teacher pay. I mean, that's pretty typical for Florida, but there were other organizations as well. There were state lawmakers, there were Democratic lawmakers who raised issues with this. The NAACP was there. I mean, so there were several other groups too. So it's not just teachers unions, but that's kind of what the state is doing a little bit, is needling the union, saying y'all kind of sparked a lot of these concerns.
Well, I'm sure that there's also parents who are concerned about this, and I'm wondering where we go from here. The Board of Education made up entirely of DeSantis appointees. So what recourse do parents have if they disagree?
Well, now this really falls on school districts to carry this out, and then we'll go through picking textbooks and things like that. But as far as the state goes, I mean, these are the standards now. These were unanimously passed by the Board of Education, and the Board of Education stood by these too. You know, they said the whole history is there. They said that they stood by these, and that they kind of downplayed the complaints as saying, you know, that we think this is great, and people are just missing the point, basically. So from the state's perspective, this is pretty much done, which is why you see them defending it today, and they doubled down on it again today, saying that this is what we're going to go with. And you still, even speaking to some of the concerns, I mean, Vice President Kamala Harris spoke out about it. She's supposed to speak in Jacksonville today. So this is getting a lot more attention than I think folks really expected it to.
All right, Andrew Atterbury, thank you.
Right now at 6, libraries are being cut from some HISD schools. Librarians are concerned the move will cripple the learning curve for students.
I actually think it's a significant disservice to the students of HISD.
The central office numbers
Tonight, city leaders are also pushing back on Superintendent Mike Miles's latest move to overhaul the district. The district says the libraries will be converted to team centers for students with behavioral issues.
KPRC2's Corley Peel live outside Pew Elementary with what this move means for current librarians. Corley.
Yeah, Pew Elementary is one of the schools that will no longer have a library or have that librarian position. And Mayor Sylvester Turner also weighed in today, saying that this move is unacceptable. I spoke with some former librarians who say that this could hurt student performance.
A school library is a wealth of knowledge. Former librarian Lisa Robinson says it's full of some of the greatest stories ever told.
It was just such a joy to help them find that perfect book.
She says those stories now ripped to shreds.
My heart is just broken for these children who are in the NES schools that are losing their librarians.
As of this week, librarian positions at 28 new education system schools are eliminated. The district says librarians at NES and NES-aligned schools can transition to other roles in the district. Libraries in 57 NES schools will be assessed on a case-by-case basis. Superintendent Mike Miles says students are behind on reading levels, especially in 4th grade. Former ISD librarian and manager of library services, Janice Newsom, says eliminating librarian positions will hurt reading performance even more.
When students engage in reading as an activity of choice, they are not only building that reading muscle, but they are also developing their vocabulary. They're understanding a bit about the world that exists outside of their 3-block radius.
The schools impacted are in predominantly underserved communities.
Our less fortunate students are the ones who suffer the most, primarily because many of them live in situations that are reading deserts. Okay, they simply don't have access to the reading materials. They don't have choice in the reading materials that they are given to read.
Robinson hopes the district can piece back the stories that students may never learn.
And the retired librarians that I spoke with say that it is.
So we're going to stop there. Newscasters just or reporters just wrapping it up. So, I have a couple of questions, and I know for me, even having watched this multiple times, it still is shocking that something like this could even get passed. And so one of the questions people would ask me is, well, who was on this task force? And what we know is that Frances Presley Rice, if you're not familiar, she's a Black woman who is a staunch conservative and Republican. Also, William Allen is a Black man and a staunch conservative as well. What we later learned is that from information provided, the task force is mostly Black folks. And so Governor DeSantis found Black conservatives to be able to justify this particular protocol or policy. And so one of the questions that I have really is, how do we reconcile what we've heard? Was it shocking to anyone? Or some folks and just say, Florida's going Florida, and should we be that shocked and surprised by it? But that aside, what do we make of the fact that Florida by law requires even teachers who are descendants of those who were enslaved and who are of African descent teach children that slavery provided a benefit to those who were enslaved? And I mean, anyone who wants to jump in can get started.
I can kick us off. And I'll say, to me personally, it's not really shocking. And it's not shocking, not because what they're doing is not something that cuts to the core, right? At least even the framing around this, I mean, it's like next level gaslighting, right? And I think what we have to realize a lot of times, and even in the policy space, and I've been in the policy space for a long time, that what certain political agendas are doing is they're winning a culture war that other people aren't even fighting, right? And so this idea that if you can frame this experience in a way that may appeal to certain masses or may reframe the narrative about what did or didn't occur, right? That's a cultural strategy that's using and weaponizing the power of narrative to really reshape what history was, right? And, you know, if you couple it together with the two stories, then you see in Houston's case, right, then they're taking away the power of written narrative to counteract what the verbal narrative is. And so when I say I'm not shocked, it's that they're playing a long game strategy that has been very much so coordinated. And we see this in different states and different communities all around the country that is focused on how do they reclaim the power to name truth. And that's something that we've seen, unfortunately, over time and become more prevalent in the last few years. So I would say to that overall arching statement that I don't think it's shocking as much, but it is something that's still very troubling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anyone else have any immediate thoughts?
I guess I am shocked because the school to prison pipeline is real. So it was a theory at first, but it's real. So when you start removing information from schools, the kids don't have access to this information. Like you say, they're controlling the narrative. But I'm shocked because in 2023, we're still fighting the same battles we fought 50 years ago, 60 years ago. How are we still fighting these same battles of equality? I don't really understand the end goal here, though. So that's why I'm shocked. Like the census is doing all these things, but 20 years from now, 30 years from now, what's the goal here? Are we trying to be divisive? Or we're trying to erase the things of American history? Like what's the goal? So I'm trying to figure out at what point do someone says enough is enough. This makes no sense. Let's just stop. Like I don't see the goal here. That's why I'm shocked. Like we're doing things without a point.
Yeah. No, I definitely.
Oh, sorry, Casey. I think it's asinine. I mean, as a former classroom teacher, if I were in the state of Florida and had a Florida teaching license, I would immediately go to another state because there's absolutely no way that I would be lying to my students in such a ridiculous way. I mean, it is obviously false. And so that's my statement on Florida. And I know we mention it and we always mention it. Florida's going to Florida, and they've shown us yet again. So I'm not shocked there. But I just really, as a teacher, want teachers to get just as radical as we saw our Black brothers and sisters do just this past weekend and stand up. I think it's really offensive as a Black American to serve on a task force group where we are in charge of ensuring that our children are learning an untruth. And we're proud of that. And so I just think that we have to really take a look in the mirror and really do some deep reflection to determine, you know, where our moral compass is. Because I think for a lot of Black Americans, it is truly lost, but I'm not shocked. But I think that at some point, very, very soon, we have to get radical or all of our truths are just simply going to be lost.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree that it's enraging just to see it happen and what seems like it happens so easy. And so for me, it just points out the importance of representation, and not just representation of skin color, right? But representation of like mindset and experience. Because it's enraging, it's baffling, but they have been doing this for a while now in terms of his story, erasing our history and telling another story. And I do wonder, when are we going to be enraged enough to do something about it? Because there are people in Florida, like as if I was a parent living in Florida right now, I would want to move, but do I have the resources? Do I have the opportunity to do that? And then, yeah, it's enraging.
Yeah.
I'm gonna stop.
Yeah. Coach Boyd, did you have something? Because there's a couple of comments popping up, you know, related to this, but I want to make sure you get a chance to weigh in.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with the general sentiment. I'm not sure that those laws are even probably meant for the kids. I mean, I spent time in public school libraries. I mean, how many kids are actually going to check out books versus probably getting information on the internet through their phone?
Well, this particular law is the social studies curriculum. It's not going into libraries. It's what the social studies teacher has to teach for standards.
Gotcha. I got you. I mean, I guess my point is that it's really for the voters. It's really to like a dog whistle. That's just basically to the to the furthest right extremes of the party. It's an example. Specifically, it's an example of DeSantis trying to out Trump, and he ain't gonna be able to do it. But these are the results of those dangerous kind of policies. So that's all.
If I could add something else too, Casey, and the reason I want to make sure I clarify when I say I'm not shocked, and it was a statement that was made earlier about like what is the purpose, right? Mm-hmm. And I believe, and even in the tenor of the news reporter, I understand he's a news reporter; it's kind of his job, is that you strike this kind of non-discordant. Well, I don't know. I guess they really didn't mean to. And it's past the point where we really need to start acknowledging like the insidious nature of public policy and intent behind and the values. Now, you know us because you know the work that we do organizationally, right? And being able to name that with a level of confidence. But this is a historical play that has been played over and over and over and over again, whereby insidious values informed insidious policy that creates disparate outcomes for Black and brown people. So when you talk about the relationship between the school to prison pipeline, right, that is purposefully done, right? It's a reflection of the fact that they don't see students of color as being valuable, right? And that they feel like that their only value to our economy is to fuel prison labor that funnels into private wealth generation, right? That's a value proposition that's reflected in the way public policy is being used to make decisions about our students on a day-to-day basis. And so I just wanted to clarify a little bit, and you kind of triggered my mind when you said that this is not in this time out for kind of the all shucks, maybe they didn't mean to. Like, no, this is very intentional. The same way that they loaded that advisory group with very specific voices who were able to verify from a perspective that we thought that maybe they won't really believe this, but they did. It's all an intentional power play that's being done. And so we have to really get hip to the game a little bit more.
Yeah, no, I agree with really everything that folks have said. There was a question that came up around, is there only one narrative of slavery for Black Americans? And while we can definitely say no, right? I mean, let's just be honest. There were folks of African descent who were slave owners as well. So we know that there was not one narrative, just like we're quick to say that Black folks are not a monolith. But we have to be honest, too, that the overwhelming majority of folks who experienced enslavement in this country did not have a good go at it, right? And so while there's always going to be an exception to a rule, are there enough exceptions for you to then say, let us change the whole narrative of what happened to a group of people based on their race and ethnicity to point out, oh, but then there was this small group of people over here that had a different type of experience. And I think that's where we sometimes get in the minutia of it, and we miss the overarching premise of the conversation, because yes, there's always going to be someone who didn't have the exact experience, but how many of those folks really had pleasant experiences, versus the overwhelming mass majority who were fearing their lives every single day?
There's also the fact that we brought skills. We brought ideas. There was so much that we brought to this country, not that we were taught, that we brought, because our history did not start with enslaved Africans. That was just one piece of our story. And they're forgetting about the builders of civilizations and the creation that happened before that. which is they've already erased, and now they're trying to erase the experience. So sorry, I had to jump in on that.
No, I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Something that we mentioned, in kind of this part of the conversation that I do want us to think about is around the mindset, right? And I know the question I'm about to ask is going to be very contentious, and so I'm doing it with all intentionality. But it makes me think about the Great Debate, and I'm not talking about Washington and Du Bois, right? I'm talking about Democrat versus Republican, liberal versus conservative. And the idea that folks felt as though, oh, well, Black people will swallow this a little easier if we tell them Black people said it's okay to teach slavery as a benefit. But we know, again, Black folks are not a monolith. All of us have had different experiences. So it goes back to not so much a Black-white thing, but more so a mindset thing, right? And I just use the Democrat versus Republican, just, get a little fire under us. It's not really a political conversation so much that I want to have tonight, but more so the mindset of someone who is conservative and all the benefits that they get from aligning themselves with conservative thinking people in politics versus folks knowing that y'all know good and damn well that this ain't something that would fly anyplace else unless you had an agenda. Is this a conversation that we need to have more of? I personally am of the thought and the school of thought that we just need to throw all of it away and maybe restart somehow, some way, right? But taking the party names and affiliations out of it, this conversation around mindset, what kind of mindset would tell someone, oh, this is good for the group, this is good for our future? What kind of mindset do you have to say, no, we're going to teach all children that being enslaved provided a benefit to them and their future generations?
So you're going to speak to mindset and you're going to remove the politics. These are the same people that ended affirmative action. These are the same people who overturned Roe versus Wade. These are the same people who denied COVID. So when you say removing the politics, I struggle with that because conservative mindset is political. I can't remove the politics. But in the mindset of it all, they all say the same thing, and it's all ridiculous. I'm afraid that if we don't figure out how to educate again the generation coming up, it's only going to get worse. And that's my biggest fear. So when you say mindset, we got to find a way to give the kids the information so they don't have this conversation and feel powerless in the midst of it all. We got to figure out how to get the kids the power back. So their mindset would be, no, we're not going to take it. No, this is not right. We're going to do something about it.
Yeah.
I think the mindset of those individuals who are advocating or who are supporting these ridiculous bills, rules, and whatnot is very capitalistic. This is a capitalistic country. And for many Black Americans who've been afforded a very privileged lifestyle or upbringing or didn't have to struggle, so to speak, and they can't really relate to a lot of the hardships that most Black Americans can, this is going to be the route that they obviously go because they are of a conservative mindset, but they're also very money driven and it is political. And so we need to really start thinking about that. Who are their families? Where are they from? Where did they grow up? Tells a lot about the kind of mindset they would have. And if they are cultured, have they traveled? Do they actually have friends who are from the hood, that they went to college with? Those kind of things we really have to start asking ourselves as well when we are listening to a lot of the foolishness that is on the news, that when we're hearing about these ridiculous laws that are being passed. And in this case, in Florida, the people who are behind it. It is very much political. It is very much a conservative, money-driven mindset of privileged Black Americans who just really, quite frankly, are disconnected to the culture as a whole. And it is their responsibility to bridge that gap because there's so many opportunities for them to actually do it. But to my sister earlier who just mentioned, it is going to get worse with regards to our children. I feel like it has gotten worse, but I don't necessarily think that our kids are naive to what's happening. I think they're very much aware of what's happening in our country when it comes to them, and they are speaking out, but their voices are just simply not being heard. So we have organizations like HAY and others around the nation that are super important to ensure that their voices are heard and that the adults who are of the mindset of just trying to put their agenda ahead of children are silenced. And I think that's the biggest issue that we're facing now.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because when we think about the relationship, and I'll say first to answer the question, I've always bordered the spectrum from being politically agnostic, right, into being more like, okay, there's very specific policy being pushed by very specific people, with very specific outcomes in mind, right, and then how do you start to combat that in certain ways? And I say agnostic in the sense that I'm more like you, Casey. I'm like, the whole thing is problematic because it's centered on power, right? And I think that goes to LaToya's comment, like this idea about who stands to benefit, who stands to gain, like what do you gain from your position or your tribalism around that position, and how does that extend to your proximity to power, right? And so that can go both ways. In various ways we see that. But generally, when we talk about like white supremacy culture or white oppression, that is centered in a belief system that right now is coming out of one very specific party and manifesting in very specific ways. And so I think to that degree, like there has to be some intentionality around not so much what the use and role of public policy is. I definitely think that's an ongoing role for education for all of the Black community about where there's latitude to push policy, to advance policy and practice, to change and shape the world in the way that we want it to be. But really at the core, how do we start to undo and think differently about the world as it could be and really start to elevate a different way of being that's outside of this, dichotomous political structure? Mm-hmm. And so I think that to that degree, there has to be more that's done to really unpack this relationship between capital and power in a capitalist society. The idea that individuals are going to vote with their own best personal interest. And so this idea that you see even a lot of Black people, right? They might be fiscal conservatives and social policy liberal, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what we see oftentimes is that the idea is like, what's going to get me the most money? And again, it's making us approximate to or in service to the economy over everything else and our personal position within it. And so this is a really complex answer and conversation to have that has a lot of off ramps that definitely need to be navigated. But I think that I appreciate you for answering or asking the question in the first place, because it's definitely something that we need to start discussing more in public spaces.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know, and I see some of the other comments coming, and there's so much that I want to get to because I want to pivot a little bit to the second part of this, which is what's happening in Houston. And the removal of libraries and media centers and essentially people's jobs, and as I was doing my research, the district made it available for those librarians, media center specialists to be able to apply for other open positions across the district and hope for the best, honestly, in the grand scheme of things. But this idea, and we brought it up, and I think Cynthia mentioned it first around the school to prison pipeline. And so I want to read just a couple of statistics for us. Sterling knows this is work that is very close to us right now, and some things that we're working on. But I don't think people really understand it until they hear the numbers. Black students, Black folks make up 4% of the world's population, right? We're not speaking of those who are still on Mother Africa and on the continent, right? Black Americans make up 4% of the world's population, yet 16% of all incarcerated people in the world. Not only that, Black students here in the United States only make up 16% of the overall total student population, yet they are 42% of all school suspensions and expulsions, right? So less than 20% is the total makeup in the school system, in the public education system, yet nearly half of the number of suspensions and expulsions. Black students make up 31% of all school-related arrests. They're expelled 3 times more than their white students and counterparts. They're suspended or expelled for discretionary violations more than 3 times, and more than 4 times likely to be in contact with the juvenile justice system the following year. So when we say that we're taking books out of the schools, now, if you weren't able to gather from the news clip, and I encourage everyone to go do your own research. This is like church. Don't take my word for it. I need you to go open up the book for yourself, okay? So I need you to go and research and understand that those 28 schools are Title I schools, and they're the schools in the most vulnerable of Houston. And if we decode language, which we've all been taught to do, these are majority Black schools where they have removed books and access to information out of those schools and have turned those into in-house detention centers. Yet people say 2 questions. This is a 2-part here. Why is everything about race? Why can't it just be about rehabilitation of disciplinary challenges and issues? And do we need to focus more on the school to prison pipeline as policies are being written and they're coded in a way where they're still funneling these Black bodies into private penal systems through our educational structures?
Could you repeat that second question again?
So the first question is, just what's your response to people who say, why does this have to be about race when we talk about these things? And then the second question is, do we need to put more of a focus on the school to prison pipeline when educational policy is being written in code, when it's still basically sending Black bodies into private penal systems and is using education as that vehicle?
Well, I guess to answer the why does everything have to be about race is because everything is about race here in our country. I mean, until we can even begin to think about trying to, air quote, solve the problem, we have to even be willing to talk about it and be willing to identify it. We ain't even really willing to identify it clearly to be able to even begin that process. So that's why everything is still still about race, and whether or not a person wants to identify it or not, it doesn't change my reality, because I know what I go through every day as a Black man. So that's that on that. The second question, I think it's leading back to your other point about the types of values one may have, and then going. I think I was mixing the 2 stories up with the library and the school curriculum, but nonetheless, both stories are I think are clear examples of reasons why we just need to have our own schools. We just you can't. I think it was like Malcolm X that said something about, like, you can't how can you rely on your oppressor to educate your children? I mean, I don't want that person to be in charge of the decisions that are going to be, that my child are going to be learning from, you know what I'm saying? So I think whatever way we can turn them dollars into, and this is a tricky conversation, whatever way we can turn them public dollars into dollars for private schools, or dollars for ways to educate kids that can be homeschooled in different ways and different manners. I mean, it can be done. We can get creative in the ways that we educate kids. We certainly creative in the ways that we can get viral videos, up right instantly after something happens. We can educate kids for 8 hours a day. We can educate them to 8 to 10 hours a day, I believe, and provide some of those wraparound services in it even as well.
Yeah, that is a tricky conversation because then when we talked about mindset and conservative, and now we're getting into vouchers and where does the money go, and and I get it. Like, I don't believe, as someone who has become enmeshed in this world, I don't believe it is a cut and dry conversation when it comes to our children. It is very hard to just say this is the only way. When we have to deal with things like this, right? Those who follow me know I am quick to get on a soapbox around certain things, and I got on a soapbox a couple of weeks about this because the reality is that if you pay attention to history, if Florida is doing this and Texas is doing this, let me tell you who's going to be next. Virginia. Okay, Virginia's going to be next because Youngkin is a whole fool, and I'm going on record to say it. Virginia's going to be next. Alabama is going to find its way. Mississippi is coming. Louisiana, Georgia's always going to be last because Atlanta is so influential. But then you have Atlanta and you got the rest of the state, right? And so when one southern state does something, the rest of them find justification for a trickle down effect. And we're going to look up in 10 and 15 years and we're going to wonder, like, oh, the South lost, but they're trying to rise again, right? And it's like we have to pay attention to what is happening, and they're inserting it into policies that they figure the people who they want it to impact negatively the most are going to miss it until it's too late. And so I appreciate you bringing that up because we do have to understand that all of these conversations are going to be complicated and they're going to be tricky, but we have to have them because we have to figure out how do we stay ahead of the game and not feel as though we're always reactive to what's happening, but being one or two steps, ahead.
Yeah, and just I think that's how we stay ahead of the game. We don't beat them, we join them. Pull your kids out of school, go to your neighbors, knock on your doors, find a way that you and their kids y'all can come together as families, have a face-to-face conversation with them, talk to them, figure out a way that you can start educating your kids in math, science, history. Even if you don't even pull them out of the public school, you can do it after school, you can do it on the weekends, you can do it you can do something more than what you are currently doing right
Yeah,
now.
just a little point of history, and then I'm get some other thoughts. That is what Sunday school was for, right? I know not all Black folks are Christians, but historically, Sunday school was designed to teach our children what they weren't getting in the schoolhouse. And that is how we knew our history and knew where we came from and knew what we were capable of because we took that hour before the worship service to make sure our children had what they need. So I got a question that's going to come later, and I've already kind of given my answer to that, but there are ways to do that without disrupting, right? Something that may work for the masses, to be able to still make sure that our children are cared for. All right. So as we pivot a little bit, one of the other questions that I have around this is the idea of, and maybe Aretta, hate to put you on the spot, but Vice Chair, School Board here, does our educational system need an overhaul, right? And not necessarily in when I say overhaul, do we need to approach education differently?
Yes.
Right? Do we need to approach it differently?
So, I mean, the simple answer is yes. We are in a different time right now, in a number of different ways, but mainly with how our children learn, attention spans, access to technology, uh, competition with mind, right? So we are no longer in a space where sitting in rows and sitting and getting is doing it for us. We have got to be more innovative and more creative, not just with what we teach, but with how we teach. And realistically, Dr. Herring would always say this, like, we are preparing our children for jobs that we don't even know are going to exist. And so we've got to be more about critical thinking, right? And not just can you regurgitate something. and more in the development. And then the other thing is the importance of mental health and how that needs to be rolled into honestly into the classroom and curriculum. So the short answer is yes, definitely.
Yeah. Cynthia, I know that you. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, Cynthia, I know that you are a social studies teacher at the high school level. Do you think that a different approach to education could help? You know, I always ask this question. My mom taught school for 38 years. And when we would ask her, why wouldn't you ever like go up the chain and become an administrator and a principal? And I'm gonna temper the version of the answer she gave us. But the meat of it was she would not have been able to be effective, because the further you get from the classroom, the less effective you can be for those young people in that classroom, especially if you don't have the support that you need. And Virginia Beach is very white. Okay, so trying to get the support that you need in that city would have been almost nearly impossible in the late 60s and 70s when my mother was starting her career. But my mom would let her students, particularly the Black boys, do what they needed to do to learn. Right? Now, my mother managed her classroom with an iron fist. You didn't play with Mrs. Venning. You gave her the utmost respect. When she said stop, you did it before she got to the P. But if you needed to stand on the table, stand on the table. You need to do a handstand in the corner, do a handstand in the corner. But when people are coming to observe your classroom, it's like, oh, you have no classroom management, yet she had the highest test scores in the building. Right? So when I say education needs an overhaul, how do we approach the facilitation of what the standards are so that our children really get what it is that they need so they can be successful?
I mean, Casey, I know we've spent a lot of time talking about it because you know my background, and I am a former principal of students who were either expelled, near expulsion, in the juvenile justice system, whose parents just decided that they no longer wanted to be their parents, so they gave them up. So they were living in residential centers. So I very much do know that the school to prison pipeline is real. It's been real for quite some time. And in so many ways, I think that we're contributing to it. And I'm just going to say it because I've lived it as parents, as the community, because we're not advocating for our children enough. Parents are their children's first teacher, but we really need to get back to the village mentality that our parents, that our grandparents had, because it truly did work. Casey wasn't just my child. Everybody in the village was Casey's mom and dad. And so they could check Casey without fear of retaliation, you know? And so I think that we truly need to get back to that, because a lot of our babies are just being raised by the horrible streets that they're just, for whatever reason, that's what they were born into. That's what they become, you know what I'm saying, accustomed to. And then school is just something that they know they have to do, but they're not engaged in, but it starts at home. So if your parents are invested, if your parents are engaged, if your parents are checking up and going to that school every 5 minutes, whether the, you know, front office desk person or principal is getting tired of them or not, be there, do whatever you can to be as invested as you possibly can in your child's education. And if you don't know the lingo, there are so many different types of triages of support that you can get so that you can understand what your child needs. So I will start with saying that parents really need to advocate more, but the actual support is there. Your village is there. And if the village isn't stepping up, the village needs to step up as soon as possible. I live in a state where they told me that it would be more to rehab our students who were struggling with various different things, from mental illness to abandonment, than actually, you know, they wanted them to just stay in the juvenile justice system. You know, just very backward thinking, very corrupt. But again, as we talked about, it's politically driven. It all points back to the dollar. And so we as Black Americans in particular really have to pay attention to that, and then have to pay attention to who we're voting into office. And that's a whole nother subject that we can get on. But getting back to what Casey was mentioning with regard to Mama Venning, classroom management doesn't have to look like everybody's sitting in a row, seated at their desk with their hands crossed. And it can't look like that in this 21st century. So our children learn various different ways. They're kinesthetic, they are spatial. You know, some are more visual than others. We need to incorporate technology into the classroom. It is our friend. It doesn't have to be a thing of the, you know, just this scary type of thing. But more importantly, teachers have to be uncomfortable. So the ways that you are used to doing things and, you know, teaching, if you like it, your students may not be reactive to it. So change it. You know, you
Right.
have to make sure that you are meeting students where they are. It's not the other way around. And then also be vulnerable to know that you don't have all the answers. You may want to listen to them because they can teach you a thing or two. So the classroom dynamic has to look totally different, but education overall needs an overhaul because it's white indoctrination that's been the same since the beginning of American education. And so if we don't understand that, we're very behind. But it needs a true overhaul so that it's representative of every type of child.
Yeah, I'll second and amen everything said. As a former classroom teacher myself, that was one of the things I hated about teaching. I taught second and third grade, and it was all repetition and structure and kind of routine. And it was like, this is boring for me. I'm a kinesthetic learner, right? So I need that activity, I need that dynamicism, and that it wasn't in the classroom. And then I always think about how much different school would look, even forgetting the changes to curriculum, right? I think we all agree that that's one very specific vein. But even just if we started to structure kinesthetic learners or different types of neurodivergence and learning environments around student need, right? Like if you learn in a very specific way, why don't we create classrooms that are responsive? And this isn't like new. I think this is the part that frustrates a lot of people. Like there's research, there's practice, like it's been demonstrated that you need to take into account neurodivergence and the different capacities or needs of individual students. But for whatever reason, our educational institutions have no desire to think about doing anything differently. And that's the part that I think is both frustrating and confusing for me, because we see the data showing us that what we're doing isn't even effective in the first place. So that would be like an easy low-hanging fruit for me, is to just take that into consideration, right? There's a chance to do something different. The tools and resources are there and have been developed. Like even if we started small and piloted very specific ways to do this, and people who say, hey, like my child needs certain types of intervention, let's give it to them and see what happens, and then figure out how we can grow that impact from there like we would do anything else. And then the other side of this, that I don't want to overlook is this relationship between student overhaul or student discipline and the school overhaul as well. And you led off the conversation today, Casey, with discussion around how particularly students of color are being criminalized from their educational experience. We know that leads to, or it results from, a lack of empathetic connection from students and teachers, right? We know, of course, that there's a racialized component in the middle of that as well. That when you see, when I used to teach, for example, they would always bring the small black kids to me and be like, he's so bad, he can't pay attention, he don't listen. And I would have no issue with little Johnny sitting in my classroom, right? Like, yo, let's talk. Like, what's going on? Everything okay? All right, cool. Like, this is what I need you to do, right? It's a certain type of way, whether that be cultural competency or whatever you want to frame it as, that you can empathetically connect to students who have those particular types of needs. But generally, nobody takes the time to take that second step. And so when you get to the point where it's a matter, again, of power and control, right? This indoctrination to this idea around white oppression and how we relate to it as Black people and as others, right? So if I'm sitting in a position of power, then my orientation to power is to weaponize it against people around me. So you do as I say do, right? Or else, right? And so when you get into those types of relationships, like, you're going to criminalize kids for being kids. Well, you know what I'm saying? The idea that we get mad at 8-year-olds for not wanting to sit down makes no sense to me. Right? Is their livelihood is about activity. They're built and wired to be active, right? And so we kind of criminalize these natural things that youth do and make it unnecessarily challenging for them to matriculate through their student process. Even for high schoolers, the same. And so how can we be really intentional about both the curriculum side, the classroom side of the conversation, and the discipline side of the conversation, which we know is having very specific outcomes as well?
Yeah, no, you mentioned that, and it takes me back to Bethune Elementary and Akeem and Martinez, and those are my two babies. Because when their first grade classroom teacher, who was a first year teacher, TFA teacher, love her, still friends to this day, still keep in touch with her. But I understand, like sometimes our babies can be a lot for me. And, you know, coming from the Midwest and being dropped in Atlanta of all places, and then Bethune on the West Side, I saw Martinez and Akeem every single day. But it took that cultural competency. It took that me having to have a different type of communication with them at times for them to understand, like, okay, I get it, you know, but we have to do something different, and we have to find a different way to respond. But I think what we don't do enough of, as we talked about a little earlier around the village, is that we don't validate our young people enough, right? And that does not mean you give passes to bad behavior. It does not mean that you ignore, things that you can see are going to be detrimental to them. But I think a lot of times we do not stop long enough to say, you know what? I can understand why you're upset. That goes a long way, even when they're completely wrong, to be able to say, I understand why you're upset. Let their defenses come down so that you can then give them the information that you need. And I think too many times because our young people are growing up in this generation where they have access to everything at their fingertips, most of them, and because they walk around as little mini adults, because that's how we're treating them, we forget their brains are not developed, right? Scientifically and biologically, their brains don't fully develop until they're 25. So you have people who have graduated from college, have graduate degrees, some have children, multiple children, married, and their brains biologically are still not fully developed. But yet we expect a 14 and a 15-year-old to be able to make decisions and forecast the rest of their lives. One of the things
just on what Sterling was saying, just about I think the reason why they ain't trying to teach kids how to think critically is basically because they trying to teach you how to be a button pusher, pretty much. And we on the whole thing about how we need to overhaul education. We're running out of button pushing jobs here. AI going to do away with that here coming up real soon. So menial labor jobs are just going to basically be non-existent, and there's going to be a whole segment of the population with no skills, and that are going to be looking with nothing to do all day. So we better figure out something for them to do, or they're going to figure it out for themselves.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so before Mr. Johnson started to speak, I want to be first, kudos to your mom for teaching for 38 years. Good job for her, because you don't hear that anymore. That's one. But two, I completely agree with what he's saying. I am fortunate enough to teach the kids I grew up with. I am them. They are me. So it's when she mentioned the hood earlier, I laughed because we don't say that enough. I'm a product of Atlanta Public Schools. So I have no shame in telling my kids that. And what they say is, oh, I graduated Washington High School. So you said Bethune. My mom still lives on the West Side to this day. Nice. So I'm proud to know where I come from. And I'm proud to tell the kids that as well. So I do flexible seating. Every time I give a quiz, they have to give me a constructive response about how I can teach them better. Because again, I need to evolve. Far too often I sit in the room with people who don't understand that we are tasked with evolving. The kids that we were, they don't exist anymore. So I teach American history. Again, I'm the only one on this panel who is suffering with this curriculum right now. But I pride myself, and I tell the kids day one, hey, listen, I may not need to say this is what I'm saying. We can't probably prepare our kids for a future if we're not telling them where they come from. The old adage, when you know better, you do better. So I am tasked with walking a very fine line. But I am an American history teacher, so my defense is always, if it happened in America, I am tasked to teach it. And you give them that what you will, but every person of every color, of every race, will be spoken of in my classroom. in regards to the young black boys, they are busy. They are rambunctious. They want to be men, but they don't know how to be men. So you put in the hallway and you have a really adult conversation with them. How can I help you? Help me help you. So these are all things that are needed. So when you say education overhaul, I'm in total agreement. But we have to do it within means. Because if we do too much too soon, we'll lose the value in what's supposed to be happening. I am not political at all. So again, I sit in a lot of rooms in silence because I can't say these things because I have a contract and I work for people. In regards to trying to be engaging, all the modalities. I let the kids pick their groups. My school has bought furniture and couches, so we have couches in the hallway. So you pick your group. The time is 30 minutes. Set on your phone. Come back when you're done doing the assignment. You have to meet kids where they are. The mental health piece. APS adopted SEL a few years ago. I think we could do it better, but I incorporate mental health because we need mental health as adults. So I let the kids know my classroom is a safe place. Today is not a good day. It's cool. You can't put your head down, but you can listen to music and find some productive to do. So you have to meet kids where they are on every level in order to engage with the children.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I want to make sure we introduce Ricardo. He jumped into the conversation here. And we'll get your thoughts around some of these next half of the questions. And Cynthia, you just reminded me of something that we do here at Hay, and Coach Boyd is awesome at it with our young people. But we do this thing called Circle of 100, where we check the pulse of our young people before we start any programming, because they, I think, deserve for us to be mindful. That doesn't mean that we're going to not do what we need to do, but maybe the facilitation and the approach of it is going to be modified. You know, like we live on the West Side. I have to be honest and real. There are days where our young people come in and they are impacted by a shooting, right? By a fight. They're impacted by something that has happened on the block. And so just to come in and expect them to be bubbly, right, is unrealistic. So let's do a pulse check. Let's see where you are today, so that we know, okay, we're gonna get through these modules, but maybe it's gonna be a little mellow day. You know, maybe we need to put some instrumental music on and not baby drill in the background, right? Let's drink this water instead of this Kool-Aid. Like, you start to make these little small changes that they don't even know about to ensure that you're giving them the tools that they need to get through what they have to do, but being mindful of the headspace and the mindset that they're coming into the space with. And I would love to see more classrooms or more schools, you know, really just help teachers be aware of that. They are sometimes the first line of defense, you know, be it fair or not, and to be equipped with the tools of knowing what questions to ask or how to read the room or do temperature and pulse checks, I think could go a very long way. So, as we get ready to move on, Ricardo, you want to take 30 seconds and introduce yourself to the folks, and we're going to get these last round of questions in. You're on mute, sir.
Sorry about that. Ricardo Allen, raised in Tennessee, went to Mississippi Valley State University, have a degree in communications. I have a podcast or two, and just a Southern man. My father was in the military, and you know he was very, very strict on me, and I am a success thus far because of his strictness and because he was. I come from a two-parent household, and part of what I think is, you know, it's not over yet, but being from Mississippi and seeing what resegregation looks like, that's when it's my turn, I'm gonna bring that up because it's when we are commingled with the others and they want to treat us badly. If we go back in history, right after Reconstruction, when we had the opportunity to start universities to educate ourselves, we were successful. They tried to take us down many times, but HBCUs are still prevalent, and I think that's the way forward.
Thank you. Yes, and Latoya and I are testaments of that in particular, just the resurgence when people have counted you out. What did they say? You can't count, because we are back and better than ever. And so I think part of, we've talked about a lot. We talked about school to prison pipeline. We talked about Why is everything about race? We have talked about, does our educational system need an overhaul? So this is where I want us to think moving forward. But I think, and Cynthia, again, you're dropping these little small gems, and I come back to you when, I get these segues. Mention that it's impossible to teach what is happening now, where we need to go if we don't teach our history and teach our past. So this is one question I try to ask people in any setting that I get in. And we could have 10 different answers for this, but just give me one. At what point in history did we get it wrong? And I'll start. My father was born in 1926. Yes, my daddy, not the man who raised me. Well, he raised me, but my actual biological daddy, 1926. My mama, 1945. And so, listening to their stories of living in the Jim Crow South and having to be active participants in protests and marches for the rights that many of us take for granted now. I remember asking my mother this question in a similar way, and she said it was our fight for civil rights. And it wasn't that we were wrong for fighting for civil rights, but it was this mindset that we believed that what we were wasn't enough, that we had to assimilate to what somebody else had in order for us to be successful. So it was how we went about it and what we did subsequently once we got, quote, air quote, those civil rights, that she feels like we should have done something different. But just the idea that we were so focused on wanting to be accepted by them that we forgot the power and the beauty of which we were, created in, and how we were moving through the space. And I think about that often, that had we fought in a different manner for what was rightfully ours, don't get me wrong, but had we fought differently for it, would we still be in the situation that we're in today? So anyone can start. At what
I
point?
can jump in. I don't know if it was the fight for me versus what we did after the fight was won. So desegregation. So when we took the dollar out of our community and thought that somebody else's stuff was better, when we stopped supporting each other and wanted to assimilate, like you said. So I think that's where we got it wrong. If we would have had the right but still supported our own and still took care of home, I think that we could have possibly evolved differently. Granted, there were moments like in Oklahoma where they ruined what we had created. But I think that if we would have kept that dollar in the community and kept that unity, we could have evolved maybe differently.
I'll say, and this is a really hard question. I've answered this different ways in the past, but I don't know if there really was a right path forward. And to that very same point that Loretta just shared, like, we know, and this is something I'm a big proponent of even in my economic development practice, and why I'm so passionate about not being in service to the economy or to Black capitalism. This idea that if we get everybody Black wealthy enough, then we'll be okay. We'll insulate ourselves from racism. And that's not true, right? It's not true functionally. Like, we've seen it historically, it's not true. That when there were self-sustaining, independent, and economically viable Black communities, what happened is white oppression burned them down, right? Like, it's both a form of dependency and codependency, where even in the cases where we didn't need them, they forced us into positions to be able to have to depend on institutions, structures, and infrastructure in order to survive. And so to that end, I don't know if there was a path forward outside of either. It's like you're between a rock and a hard place. Either we fight for liberation in a way that might be more forward, right? And maybe we win some concessions, but history has shown us that with every wave of progress, there's always a counter current that comes on the other side. And that's one thing one of my mentors always told me, is never to be discouraged by what we see happening around us even today and what's happening in the Supreme Court and other, that this is just a wave of countercurrent that they're pushing against the progress that has been made. And next time what we do is we just push that much further, right? And so, but I do want to take note of what you said, and this will be the last thing I shared, Casey, about the concept of respectability, right, being core to this conversation as well. This idea that we have to be approximate to whiteness, or we measure our value by which our acceptance by white value then tells us that we have or we are. And that being values, including how we see ourselves and what we relate to in the world around us, as being esoterically the point where we got it wrong. Because it wasn't about, to your point earlier, what was enough for us or what value we brought or the resourcefulness and talent and the gifts that Black people already had inherently. It became this idea that we don't have enough unless they show us that we have what they have, or once we obtain what they say we should have. And that's the point. And I don't know if that's a particular specific point in history. We, of course, can go back through the history of Black academia and the discussions that were happening at various points in time. But I think all of that relates back to this idea about our approximation to white value structures and systems. And really, the only point of departure moving forward is to reject some of those things for us, to create the world that we really want to see.
I don't even know how to follow that, Sterling, because I can just snap to all of that. But I don't even know if it's a point of where did we go wrong, because I feel like there were so many wonderful examples of what could have become with regard to our mindset, our trajectory, our economic empowerment. We had all those examples in so many wonderful Black leaders before us, even in the most extreme leaders who in the world's eyes were so opposite with regard to what a Black man is, in Malcolm and Martin. I think this is a very, like Sterling said, a very interesting question to pose that's hard to answer. But what I gather is that I think we really didn't take time to heal as a people from all the atrocities of our slavery past through civil rights. I mean, our parents and parents saw lynchings. That's not far removed. That just happened. I mean, it's still happening. Like, we really didn't take time to heal from our 2 Black leaders being assassinated. We didn't know what to do with it. And so when you have an individual in America who happens to be Black already by just the color of their skin, not having the same types of opportunities as others, but then laying on that very traumatic, real, this whole experience that I'm trying to live, that I'm trying to sort through, and I don't even have probably the means to go talk to people. And if I do have the means, will they really understand me? Because majority of those doctors back in the day weren't Black. There weren't a lot of Black doctors who could really speak to how you could heal and move forward in your trauma. I think that's part of the problem. I certainly think that the dollar should have stayed in our community. But I also think we were looking for another Malcolm and Martin when they were trying to let us know that it was already within us. We are the people who could make the change. We are the catalyst of change. We don't have to depend on the next Malcolm or Martin or Stokely or all these other wonderful figures. They were trying to instill that in us because they knew that they were going to expire at some point, just like we knew. So we were waiting on that next person when in actuality, it was already within us. And I think that's one of the things that have, to me as a Black American, was probably the biggest letdown in the history of us being Black in America. But then even look into the Black Panther Party. I talked to relatives, I talked to friends, and I talked to people that I know who were from that era who said that they were told to just completely not even look at the Black Panther Party. Like, that was your sure way of, dying. The Black Panther Party taught us so much when it came to pride, when it came to economic empowerment.
We breakfast for our children.
Actual people, teaching our children, feeding our family. There was so much knowledge that we gained from these wonderful, beautiful Black people that we were, in our mindset, as Mama Venning was sharing with you, We wanted to assimilate and be accepted so much that we missed those opportunities. And it's really sad because we had all the examples before us, but we already know it. It's within us. We just have to be the change that we want to see, but we have to do that collectively. And that's the issue. We are so divisive, and that was the plan that they wanted to happen. That's still happening. But if we come together collectively, I feel like we could get further, and that just hasn't actualized yet. But it's a very complex question. But I really think that healing has a lot to do with it, as well as us just thinking we needed that next Black leader.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I've had this conversation with Mama Benin, with your mama specifically, and it's an interesting one. Both of us going back and forth on it, but
Imagine.
yeah, that I do agree with. Of course, that us deciding that Massa's ice water was colder or whatever was a better way about going about things. I think the democratization of technology and this generation coming up behind us are really, if you pay attention, we're gonna be all right, because they are coming through and doing things. I mean, look at Aquaman. He was 16 years old. You know what I'm saying? Nobody, a whole cadre of adults above the thing recording it. You got every angle of it from people recording it at the same time. It took one kid to jump in and take action and actually, you know what I'm saying, do something. So I think we're going to be all right with programs like Hey, of course, you know, coming up and showing these kids, kind of trying to show them the way. But it's gonna be a tough road, because we behind big time. You know what I'm saying? With all them statistics we rattled off in the beginning. You know what I'm saying? It makes it's a thankless job, and it makes it even harder. You know what I mean? But if nobody does it, then we are gonna go extinct. You know what I'm saying? So melanin will be no more. You know, so we better figure out a way.
I just want to elevate too, and I want to make sure this is somebody shared in the chat about how respectability was a survival tactic too, right? And we always talk about giving grace to our ancestors. Like, when the choice is to die or survive, right, then you're going to be forced to make different decisions. And I definitely don't want to gloss over that fact, right? When we say that it was a point of departure, it's not to be ignorant of the fact that people did that as a tactic to make sure that they were just going to see tomorrow sometimes. Right. And if you got families and you got children and you want to see a future, I mean, you can't really knock somebody for saying, look, I just want to be there, you know? And so definitely don't want to overlook that too.
No, that's a good point. You know, I have leaned into being unmarried and no children, and, you know, not owning a home, because that frees me up to be able to do and say the things that other people can't, because they have to worry about a mortgage, and they have to worry about, am I going to go home to my children, and can I spend this night, you know, and can I get up at 2:00 in the morning and go pick this child up? You have different responsibility when you are responsible for other humans, right, in your personal space. And so I think, you know, Sterling, to your point, for those of us who have the bandwidth, there's not enough of us who utilize the bandwidth. And I think that goes back to something Latoya said around the village. Like, we're not all going to get to the destination the same way, and that is okay. But we have to find our lane, and we got to stay in it, right? And when you stay in your lane, it's less traffic. I don't get in your way, you don't get in my way. We get to where we need to be, and all will be well, right, in the grand scheme of things. But I think a lot of times, and I had this conversation with someone yesterday, and I want to pivot to this next question, but the idea that because one of us made it out, that everybody should now have the blueprint to make it out. And that's just not always the truth, because if we begin to break down how you made it out, 9 times out of 10, you had a support system. Even if it wasn't your biological or by DNA family, you had a support system. Someone showed you something could be different. And I'm only bringing that up because, like, literally, I'm sitting at the Hay House, and the last 30 minutes, Hadi and I have heard helicopters whirring around the house, which means they're looking for somebody, right? Somebody has done something over here in the bluff, and they're looking for them, because it sounds like this helicopter could sit right here on this front yard, is how close they are. And so when I think about the conditions of which a lot of our young people are growing up in, to make a blanket statement that, oh, just try hard, oh, just, read more, oh, just all these just, when they're walking down streets where bullets are flying. And people hear me say that, and then they think I'm being facetious or exaggerating. And Coach Boyd knows this. I know that personally from having bullets fly past my head trying to corral children from a space. It is a very real condition over here. And folks are always like, how do you solve for that? Which goes to my next question. And again, this is something where we're going to have many answers. So I'm not saying that there's one thing to do, but for the sake of time, I want us all, I'm going to go around to give us a thing that we can do, is how do we solve for generational poverty? And I know that is just, right? That is out there. It is huge. It's big. I mean, some people may say, girl, you tripping. Why do you even think you can? Like, I mean, you'd be surprised what people say to me. But what is a thing? Because it's going to be more than one thing, but what is a thing that we can solve, we can do to solve for generational poverty? And I say that because when we talk about the school to prison pipeline, right, those are usually young people who are coming from impoverished communities. When we talk about failing test scores, those are usually schools in impoverished communities, right? When we talk about the job employment rate being higher than the national average, those are usually impoverished communities. When we think about rising crime rates, those are in impoverished communities. So almost everything that we talk about as a societal ill goes back to poverty. And it's not just Black folks in poverty, fully aware of that. This conversation is about us, though. So if we go back to poverty being one of the root causes for all these other things that we're seeing, breakdown in family unit, usually in impoverished communities, right? Not to say people on all economic levels, but you'll see more unmarried couples in impoverished communities. How do we solve for generational poverty so that we give our young people a fighting chance?
So you mentioned the bluff, and I laughed because I told you I grew up in the English Avenue community. I grew up
on Neal Street, Cynthia.
I went to English Avenue Elementary, which is now closed. So when you said the bluff, I was really tickled, thinking, "Wow, like you're really Atlanta." But I said that to say this: you can't solve generational poverty, but what you can do is address elements of it. So I told you I'm a product of the community. I'm a product of APS. I have a bachelor's to master's and a specialist. I taught college, I taught everything from pre-K to college. My brother is a manager at CarMax. He's a mechanic. My family, we had 2-parent households. I grew up with my mom and my dad. So I don't know if you can solve it, but I do know that kids don't know what they don't know. You don't know that it's a world outside of your world until you decide to go outside of your world. Does that make sense? Washington High School did really well to give us so much exposure. You had no excuse not to be successful in something. We had, I think, 7 or 8 magnet programs, 9 or 10 academies. So a lot of the classmates that I graduated with started out with some, as simple as with the, I think it was called Health and Human Service then. So some kind of little, it was an academy. And you started doing like light nursing jobs in high school. Well, now they're like registered nurses. So I'm saying that you can't solve generational poverty, but I do think that exposure is the key. Every kid does not need to go to college. That is not a real thing. But I do think that children can learn a skill and make a life off of that skill. I do think to be successful in society, you need a job, you need income, you need wages. But in order to do that, you have to teach kids something. So when you say solve it, I don't think there's a solution, but I do think that there are processes in place for kids who don't have a support system at home or don't have educated parents. They don't know their parents are not educated because mom and dad works. They pay the bills. They have somewhere to stay. They have food to eat. They don't understand that their mom probably didn't graduate from high school, but she provides for them. So it's our job in the education system to teach kids they can do something and you can be successful at something.
Yeah.
So I don't have a solution, but again, being a part of a lot of the community, I know that exposure is key.
Thank you.
I know something that would certainly help, I would say, is wraparound services that help stabilize the home. A lot of our children that are experiencing challenges with their outcomes, it's because they're going to more than one school in the course of one school year. So if you're starting behind already and you meet a teacher and by the time the teacher gets to know you, you change in schools, you're never really going to catch up. And they're changing schools because the house isn't stable. So wraparound services that help to stabilize the home. I mean, it's a blessing if there's two parents or even if there's one parent that can pay the bills. But we have a lot of parents that can't do that, they're sleeping on couches, that are just honestly living day to day. So if there's a way to help the parent, that's going to stabilize the household and make it easier for them to want to learn because I think you've all heard the poem about Johnny didn't have a pencil, right? So like, how can you concentrate on self-actualization when you're still trying to meet your basic human needs?
Absolutely.
And so our families need help with that stabilization of the household, mentally and physically and financially.
Aretta, would you believe that a lot of our parents are without a home, but they won't enroll their kids into McKinley-Vento, which is a homeless act that would give them all those resources that you just named? They are too proud to say that they don't have a home, but the school system will provide all the things they need to make the kids go to school and give up their history. The parents don't say they need help.
Yeah,
I'm hearing some feedback. So I couldn't really hear what you were saying.
Go ahead.
No, I was just saying I was hearing some feedback, so I couldn't really hear what Cynthia was saying. I heard you mention McKinney-Vento, but everything after that kind of blank. I don't know if it was just me though.
Can you hear me clear now?
Yeah, no, that's perfect.
Okay, so I was saying that a lot of our parents won't admit they need help. So you can't help someone who doesn't say they need help. Closed mouths don't get fed. So South Carolina High School is where I work. We have a high transient population. And you can tell those kids are going through something because you can tell. What I'm saying though, I would mention to the parents, well, if you just say this or if you just do this, we'll be the ends to meet. Like we'll do it. They won't say it. They won't accept the help. They won't take it. And I try to explain to them that if you can't do it, somebody will. And we're trying to keep the kids happy and stable and try to give them a fulfilling education experience. They're in high school. Parents won't take the help. So what do you say to that?
Yeah.
And I think that's a pride issue, Cynthia. I'm sure you see it too. I work with kids who are on the McKinney-Vento list and who experience housing insecurity, homelessness. You really just like with students, you have to meet parents where they are, and they're going to be very raw and unfiltered and, very combative when it comes to that, because that's a very sensitive topic for them. And we don't know the, types of hardships that they are truly facing that then we clearly see more when it comes to kids. But I just encourage everybody who works with students and parents who are in that situation, just keep gently pushing, stay in their lives, be encouraging as possible, because it is a very difficult situation to navigate through. And like Sis said earlier, they need all the supports in the world, but I know that we have to get that okay from them until we do, we just have to keep at it because our babies need it. Our babies truly need that fighting chance, like you said, but so do our actual parents. So I just encourage everyone to just keep pushing. It is hard, but you have to keep pushing.
I have 2 quick points, and I'm going to be the contrarian in this conversation, unfortunately. A lot of time, and that's not to say that there aren't pride issues, right, and being willing to accept help. I think a lot of times, though, we're dealing with a population of people who have been let down by institutions who make them promises, right, or that get run through the ringer. I've dealt with, and so in the myriad of other career experiences I've had, I was a social worker for 4 years. And I dealt hands-on with the McKinney-Vento Act for a population of students who were fully transient in state custody, and they couldn't even service those kids, right? And so when we talk about the way in which institutions relate to people, and then we say, well, they should just ask us for help, it's like ignoring the fact that there have been a lot of institutional failures in the middle of that too. So I just didn't want to ignore that fact on the other side. And then to answer your initial question, Casey, I would say, and I'm going to borrow from something that Justin Dawkins said yesterday, and I really love the fact that he said this. Like, there's no such thing as creating generational wealth because you can't create new wealth. Wealth is only transferred, right? And so the fact of the matter is they're not really making more money and resource, and the ones that they do, they're not giving to the people who need it most. So everybody is in the midst of some transactional relationship to get a little bit of that money that they can. And so the idea around how do we solve for generational poverty, in my mind, is really centered around creating new economies and new economies of scale that start to even out the playing field or redistribute wealth in a way that gives access to everybody to have it. Because otherwise, everybody's just doing what they can to get a little bit of that pie where they can.
Well,
speaking of money, helping the ones who are coming up, helping the ones who are finishing high school or no longer attending high school, going into the workforce, whether they get a skill or trade or they go to college, but helping them understand what success looks like, how a dollar is really used, and to not look at the TV and see the rappers and the entertainers and the basketball players and football players and say, hey, this is the standard I need to live by. That is not the standard. The standard is the people that you can see and touch. The standard is the people that's in your neighborhood or a couple streets over, and what they drive and what they live like, and what the fact that they have to go to work at 6, 7 o'clock in the morning every day, 5, 6 days a week. This is what success looks like in America, and there should be gauged by that, not by what they see on TV or on the internet. And being able to appreciate the dollar, how to use it, live below your means, prepare for those rainy days, and be able to live a successful life.
Yeah, I think it's kind of impossible to. I don't think you can solve the generational wealth poverty in a system that's set up like ours, as far as capitalism and having the smallest amount of people at the top with the largest amount of money and the biggest amount of people at the bottom with the smallest amount of money and resources. So you kind of always have to have somebody at the bottom in this system, in this pyramid, if you will. You know what I'm saying? The reality is, you just don't want to see the people at the bottom look like you. There's somebody going to be at the bottom. It used to be poor white Irish people and Italians or whatever. Well, I guess it's all, since our inception, since we came here, we've been at that proverbial bottom, right? But you have to work on the stereotypes, the way that we're seen. You can't necessarily change how somebody else is going to see you, but you can aid in your own behaviors, right? You can not throw trash on the street. You can hold the trash and put the trash in a trash can. You can do that. So simple things like that, I guess, is what I'm getting to. But nonetheless, so you can't solve generational poverty, because the rich people are going to need somebody to point to and say, that person is poor, I feel better, because that person is poor and I'm rich. And so, yeah,
No.
you want to make the cushion, you want to make the cushion a little bit more comfortable, and you don't want those, you're tired of seeing Black people being seen as poor. You want somebody else to take that mantle, if you will. So yeah.
It reminds me of there was this clip that was floating. I don't know if you all know who Kevin O'Leary is, but he is the like balding white guy on Shark Tank. And he has this show that he does. I don't know what station it's on or whatever. But the young lady who I guess is always his counter gave him a statistic from Oxfam that said that the 26 richest people in the world have the amount of wealth of 3.9 billion people. 26 people amassed the amount of wealth in dollars equivalent to 3.9 billion. Be like Boyd, right? Billion people. And so I agree with everybody, right? It's the same thing. God ain't making no new dirt, right? So when you think about, real estate and that kind of thing, it's like, oh, I'm gonna get in the real estate game. It's not like you can go to a brand new part of the world that has not been identified or untouched in the sense that somebody doesn't know where it is. God is not going to make any more dirt. You have to figure out how does what it's here get transferred to me and what it is that I want to do. And I think that is like one of the last questions as we get ready to get into like our final thoughts is how do we talked about mindset earlier. How do we share that mindset with young people, right? How do you position yourself to utilize the tools and the resources available to you to be a conduit for the transfer to happen? How do we set them up for success for them to be able to receive the transfer of wealth or knowledge or resources or opportunity? Insert whatever word makes sense for you. How do we set them up for success?
I want to, oh, sorry, Mark. I want to say that I do agree a lot with what Coach Boyd just said. It's really hard to say that we can solve generational poverty if the system that was created by whites was created so that we could stay at the bottom. Until the system is dismantled and overhauled, there's always going to be the issue of it. But like Cynthia said, we could do our part by really exposing our children to the opportunities, representing ourselves in the classroom, in the community, in various different ways. They need to see that so that they could see what they could be, because if they can't see it, then they're definitely going to think that they can't be it. So I think that the system has to be interrupted. The problem is we don't have enough interrupters. We don't have enough disruptors because we're scared still. And that's a very real thing. I'm scared, but I'm also unwilling to go further into this life that God is blessing me with, still in this state of this is what it is, and I'm just going to accept it. That's just not something that I'm going to accept. And so I feel like I'm becoming more radical each day because I'm leaning into myself enough to know who I am and whose I am. And I think that once we get to that point, then we can start having some real conversations about how we're going to disrupt it. Yeah. But I also think, to your question that you're asking us, we just as an educator alone, educators have to carry so much. There's so many things that educators are responsible for throughout the entire school year, from ensuring that their students are making academic gains, from ensuring that they have top performing students, to ensuring that they are seen as a highly, effective teacher. Lots of different things that they are responsible for. And I'm not saying that those things aren't important, because as an educator, former administrator, all those things, test scores are a thing. You have to test in pretty much every profession that you're in to show that you're competent. But the problem is these tests are historically racist. They're set up in so many ways to allow for our students to fail. So you have to teach to the test. So I say all that to say, as educators, we really need to teach creativity and foster and promote that as much as possible, because by the time our babies reach third grade, that creativity lens gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And so they're not able to innovate. They're not able to think critically, as we talked about. They're not able to be creative. So I think we really need to make sure we're teaching them how to become economically empowered. Promote that entrepreneurial spirit. If they want to have a lemonade stand, teach them how to have a lemonade stand, but be the boss of it. Now, how can we make more profit? You know, really teaching them how to own as much as we consume. And we consume as Black folks a lot in this country, but we need to own more. So teaching them how to own, how to be the boss, how to be the person who's writing the checks, that can start as young as kindergarten. And I think that we all know how we can do that in various different ways. But I think that is going to be a way that we can put a dent into this very big, real issue that we have with poverty.
I don't want to make myself sound like I'm some dynamic teacher, but I am really innovative. So I have a counterpart that teaches ELA at my school. We oftentimes get together and figure out how she can teach literature and I can teach American history, and we're teaching the kids in a curriculum they don't see themselves in. So I'm okay with coloring outside the lines. What are they gonna do, fire me? I don't know. But the way I see it, if I lose my job by speaking truth to power, then it was worth it. I just had a set of twins graduate this past May. So I pride myself in saying that I treat all the kids that sit before me like they're my own. And my kids deserve the truth. So I think every other child deserves the truth. In regards to economics, they have now put financial literacy on the course load for social studies. So I feel like it's a first step because we are behind the 8 ball as a race. We know that, like you said, some things are put in place to make sure we don't look like everybody else on paper. So I think financial literacy is a big deal. My other thing in regards to the test, I teach the only tested course in social studies for high school. So I'm all U.S. history. And believe me when I say it, I do not teach to a test. I teach the standards. And the way I see it, I teach the information. If I teach all of it, they'll pass the test because I'm teaching them what's required of me. But again, I stand on American history. Whatever happened here, I'm teaching. So there's every color, every creed. White is right. So from the earliest, the plan of America in 1607, America has been a class society, and it still is. We've always had our elites, and we've always had our working class from the 1600s until now. So we have to tell our children the truth about the society they were born into. We were born into this. We didn't ask for this. So it is our job to make sure our kids know all that they can know. And once they have the information, it's up to them to use it accordingly.
I'll say quickly, I think, yes to everything said, definitely. But I want to go back to something Coach Boyd touched on earlier. And he talked about the rise of innovation and the tools to create a new thing, whatever the new thing is, and how little listening to young people that we do as adults. And I'm in the boat with Cynthia, right? I'm like, if whatever we've been doing ain't working, right? Like, let's try something else. And what would be the harm in doing more power sharing and inviting young people to the table to ideate with us about how we need to change the world and make it into something different, right? And so in wrestling with kind of this overall concept, this idea that we see an emerging world and an emerging economy, and this is as somebody who is touching on and professionally accountable to economic development, there are things on the horizon that I have no idea how to make sense of, right? But you know who does? These kids, right? These high schoolers, these middle schoolers are building worlds that we can't even see, right? And they're engaging in commerce in ways we don't even understand. And we're still studying sticks and bricks and trying to make the same old button pushing jobs as was alluded to earlier. And what we're not doing is inviting them to the table with us to say, like, how do you see the world? And what do we need to see differently? And what do we need to understand? And so that's not to minimize the role of mentorship and teaching and learning and growth and imparting of wisdom. I think all those things have their place. But I also think that there's a role where we need to, one, as adults, be dismantled of our pragmatism and our natural defensiveness to change and learn how collectively how we dream again better and bigger And how do we keep encouraging them to dream and be creative, to that point that LaToya just made and Cynthia was making, about how do you want to see the world? And then how do we start to construct what we want to see versus trying to fit them to within what is? Because I think that's the pragmatic view of the world, is to say, well, it's set, like whatever it is what it's going to be. And it's constantly evolving and changing around us, but we're not capitalizing from the position of being able to set the bar on what the change is going to look like in the future. Mm-hmm. And so I would just say it like that. Maybe what we want to do is learn our capacity to dream again and partner with young people in a way that we're starting to create a world together.
No, I love it.
Yeah, and just quickly, I think we don't gotta like reinvent the wheel. You know what I'm saying? Like, even when I first began to think about getting into this work, to Toya's point, like, it is a lot of people are scared. You know what I'm saying? I was scared to quit my career to do this full time. That was one of the most terrifying things I've done as a man, you know what I'm saying, in my life. And I can't imagine me in it as a whole, like making a decision and doing something like that, or being able to have the unique set of situations that I had that gave me the ability to be able to do that successfully. But nonetheless, it was still, you know what I'm saying, it was still just, that was terrifying. I mean, even just having to walk up to a kid and figure out why you out here selling water, why you out here, you know what I'm saying, why are you out here doing this, period. Even that in and of itself is, you know, making new friends. It's terrifying work, you know. It's a lot more scarier than going in. You have to be a little bit more brave than just to go into a place and just swipe a clock every day, you know what I'm saying, and get that hourly pay, and you know you're gonna clock out at 4 o'clock and you're gonna leave, and them problems ain't gonna follow you home like they will follow you home at 2 o'clock in the morning when the kids calling you when they get bailed out of jail, you know what I'm saying, when they mama done kicked them out of the house, you know. So yes, it is quite terrifying, you know. And I think to wrap it up, I think that we don't got to reinvent the wheel. Like, I think that's the way that I approached it. Like, I knew my skills, the simple things that I knew how to do, and every kid was going to be something that I was willing to teach. But I may be able to teach a kid how to square a portrait, how to daggone the difference between the 7/16 and the 3/8 inch. I may be able to teach them, you know what I'm saying, how to properly tie, how to put cufflinks on, how to look somebody in the eye, speak to them properly. You know what I'm saying? We all, iron sharpens iron. I'm speaking as a man here, obviously because I am one, but as a community, even, you all have different set of skills, and that speaks to the secret sauce that Casey and I have that makes Hayes so successful. The way she approaches things and the way, and then it just comes together and it's a more total wraparound than just doing it for one set. So yeah, that's how I feel about getting the youth to be able to change.
Thank you.
I think that discipline and reduced options are the way. We came from not having many options, the leadership, and I think we've kind of gotten away from that overall to more liberal thinking. And with that, we have everybody going different ways instead of everybody going in the pathway. I think that we need to find a way to know that this is a marathon relay where we have to keep sending people, and all of them are going to look the same, act the same, and have the same open mindset to empower the community. And no matter who it is, if they look like us, they're going to have the same mindset of being positive and wanting the best for the community. So if somebody falls by the wayside, then we have another one coming up. So it's more of everybody has to be disciplined. We have to have the mindset of it's not okay to be that one wild child who's not going to follow the rules, because all of us are following the rules. Same principle as the community raises the child. So no matter who, everybody is that child's mama, or father. And we just need more discipline, because the kids, because they're kind of led to, okay, it's okay. It's actually not okay. I think we're falling down because we're giving them too much leeway. And from what my father taught me, discipline there's nothing wrong with it. It'll correct you when you think that, today is not the day, but you still get up. We didn't have the option once we got out of slavery, right before Reconstruction. Everybody didn't say, hey, we made it out. No, they realized, yes, we made it out. We have a lot of work to do. We made it to where we wanted to get, but now the work starts. So I think we need to get back in the mindset of, let's get back to work. We have not won. This is not a victory lap, and we are very far away from where we want to be, especially if they're allowed to say that slavery was okay. Slavery helped us. No, I'm not going to use cuss words, but if anybody who looks like me says that's okay, we got a problem. So we need to go fix that first, because obviously they didn't say that it was indentured servitude was good. They didn't say that. That's talking about the Irish and the Italians, like you said earlier, sir. So yeah, they're not going to say that. It only affects the black and brown. So that's why they're going to talk about us. So unless we all are relay the next person up and say, yes, we have the same mindset. We want to be positive. We want to correct these things. And because we don't have a Malcolm or Martin, which we have nobody's been close to that since 1968, then we need to get back to being more disciplined and more consistent.
Just for the record, they'll never say indentured servitude was bad, because it still exists. And they still making money off of it.
Indentured servitude gave us our first slaves, and they were white. So that's the first lesson in U.S. history. Again, if it happened in America, you got to tell our parts of it. It's not just one lane. Our first service in this country did not look like us.
I get it. But somebody who don't look like me told me that indentured servitude is the same thing as slavery.
No.
I'm not saying, I said he does not look like
me. Yeah, I'm not saying you said it. I'm just saying no.
Yeah, okay.
So, no, I mean, for me, it is definitely back to that. What is the final destination, right? And making sure that we have the tools and the resources that we need to get there. And so, just reading some of the comments. Yes, yes. I don't, necessarily, and I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but as we're nearing time, I think the idea of discipline is around having standards. Like, let's just be honest. Like, a lot of times in our communities, we have relaxed standards for our young people. We have relaxed accountability for them in an effort to. I'll tell this real quick kind of anecdote. I remember in my mid-20s, and when you're in your mid-20s, you're not bright. I remember telling my mama, you didn't help me, right? When I thought about, applying to colleges, you didn't help me find my schools. You didn't help me research. You didn't help me write my essays and all that. And my mother, because I know.
You told that to Joyce Benny?
I did. I told you I was in my mid-20s.
I'm sure you had a mouthful that you got back to.
Lost my mind. She very calmly looked at me and said, you would not be who you are if I did it for you. And, as I'm older, I can look back and know that my parents were there for me every step of the way. It didn't look like what I wanted at the time, but she was instilling in me the ability to go get it for myself, to stand on my own 2 feet, knowing that there was this safety net there. And I think a lot of times, one, we do too much for our children. The second thing is we don't discipline them in a sense, and I'm not talking about corporal punishment, although I'm not opposed to it, just my own personal side note. I'm not talking about corporal punishment, I'm talking about the discipline of, you need to get up on time. You had chores, you need to make sure that they get done. If you choose not to do these chores, if you choose to always, run late for everything, this is the consequence that you're going to see, whether it's a privilege being taken away or whatever it looks like. There has been a lack of discipline, I think, across the board in terms of building up strong children. I can't remember who said it, but everybody knows the quote: "It is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men." And I think we need to get back to building up strong children so that we then have men in our communities who can lead and, make sure that our village and our families are back where they need to be, whatever that may look like, right? As we move forward to get back to what the ultimate goal is. So last thing, we're gonna go around the room. I want everybody to tell us what you got going on, where people can find you. These are our final thoughts because we are right at 9:00. This has been an awesome conversation. I appreciate everybody being a part of it. If you caught it in the middle, go back and catch the replay. We hit some hard stuff earlier, but we're going to start at the top and kind of work our way around clockwise. So, Miss Cynthia, give us your final thoughts in about 30 seconds.
It'll be less than 30 seconds. My final thoughts are that I need everybody who's in the classroom to take a stand. Don't lose your job, it could be contract, but do these kids the good justice of giving them what they need. It's more than one story. Tell it all and let them figure out what's right. Let them figure out what's good for them.
Yeah. Good trouble.
Is it on me?
Yep, it's on you.
Okay, my quick 30-second final thought: invest in folding chairs.
You ended with my start.
Yep, full circle.
Gotta complete the loop. Yep.
Toya.
My final thoughts are to just meet students where they are, to build them up for the success that they define for themselves, not you, because success should be defined from the baby's point of view. And they are incredibly brilliant. So teach them how to lean into that, because what they think they don't already have, they actually do. And it really does take a village to train the child. It takes everyone, and we can't always assume that their parents know. So when their parents don't know, be that adult that steps up in a loving way to teach them the way, and do it with love, do it with grace, but meet them where they are. Meet them where they are.
Good stuff. Ricardo?
You can find me on YouTube and Instagram, Unfiltered Polo Blue. Again, on YouTube and Instagram, Unfiltered Polo Blue. I say lead from the front, be the light at the end of the tunnel, be that lighthouse in the water. For, as you said, sir, so Aquaman knows where he needs to go.
Coach.
Yeah, I'm with Sterling. Get them chairs up. Stay strapped. I mean, y'all know, if you don't know, you can follow me at Thrive Survival. Other than Hey, and I'm all about. I'm an advocate for security. We were talking in the chat a little bit earlier about the ways that we were treated and the ways that whites have come to combat us in the past. But we have 2A. We got guns now too. We can shoot now too, just as well, if not better, a whole lot better. I teach kids how to shoot every week, and we can secure ourselves now. So that's it.
Well, good folks. And I know we had Vice Chair Aretta Baldwin had to drop a little earlier, but I appreciate all of you for joining this conversation. They're never easy conversations to have. We are going to not always agree on the how or the why, but I am just really full in a good way and just content that we do agree that there's something we can do when we come together. And as we kind of lean more into where our levels of expertise are and our experience, I think that we will get to the destination and we will be able to walk lock and step with our young people because they're a group of elders that have gone before them that want to help show them the direction and the path that they can take for them to be able to be successful. So hoping that we can have more conversations, maybe in person next time, and, get lots more people in the space in the room. But we can't be afraid to say the hard things. We can't be afraid of what other people are going to think of us by speaking up and speaking out. But it is really, really important for us to ensure that we are taking care of our children, because no one else will. So thank y'all so much, everybody in the comments and viewing. Again, share this with folks so they can catch the replay, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.